All right, my friends, here in Ms. Donovan, Miss Cherry's class. Miss Bryant here again. I am in a little reading corner here, sitting on a watermelon. I wish you guys were sitting here with me. And we're going to start reading our first book. So here's our first book we're going to read today. And it is called The Little House by Virginia Lee Burton. Once upon a time, there was a little house, way out in the country. She was a pretty little house, and she was strong and well built. The man who built her so well said, "This little house shall never be sold for gold or silver, and she shall live to see our great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren living in her." The little house was very happy. She sat on a hill and she watched the countryside around her. She watched the sun rise in the morning and she watched the sun set in the evening. Day followed day, each one a little different from the one before. But the little house just stayed the same. In the nights, she watched the moon grow from a thin new moon to a full moon, and then back again to a thin old moon. And when there was no moon, she watched the stars, way off in the distance. She could see the lights of the city. The little house was curious about that city and wondered what it would be like to live there. Time passed quickly for the little house as she watched the countryside slowly change with the season. In the spring, when the days grew longer and sun warmer, she waited for the first robin to return from the south, and she watched the grass turn green. She also watched the buds on the trees swell and apple trees burst into blossom. She watched the children playing in the brook. Well, I guess that's kind of what's happening at our house right now. We're pretty much in the spring and it's raining and you see all the birds and the flowers coming out. Sounds like today you should go outside and play a little bit. In the long summer days, she sat in the sun and watched the trees cover themselves with leaves and the white daisies cover the hill. She watched the gardens grow, and she watched the apples turn red and ripen. She watched the children swimming in the pool. In the fall, when the days grew shorter and the nights grew colder, she watched the first frost turn the leaves to bright yellow, orange, and red. She watched the harvest gather and the apples picked. She watched the children going back to school. In the winter, when the nights were long and the days were short, and the countryside was covered with snow, she watched the children coasting and skating for year followed year, and the apple trees grew old. The new ones were planted, the children grew up and went away to the city. And now at night, the lights of the city seemed brighter and closer. We kind of had a funny season this year. We didn't have much snow. We had that one snow day. Do you remember? Started snowing and then we had to, I think we left a little early that day. I can't remember. But we left early and then we were out of school the next day and there really wasn't any snow. It was kind of a crazy day. I think they were expecting a lot more. Do you remember that? One day, the little house was surprised to see a horseless carriage coming down the winding country road. Pretty soon there were more of them on the road and fewer carriages pulled by horses. Pretty soon along came some surveyors and surveyed a line in front of the little house. Pretty soon along came a steam shovel and it dug a road through a hill covered with daisies. Then some trucks came and dumped big stones on the road. And then some trucks came with little stones. And then some trucks came with tar and sand. And finally a steamroller came and rolled it all smooth, and the road was done. Now the little house watched the trucks and automobiles going back and forth to the city. Gasoline stations, roadside stands, small houses followed the new road. Everyone and everything moved much faster than before. Well, it makes me wonder, do you think that the little house likes that the road came and all the houses came and the hustle and bustle? Because remember, she liked looking at the city lights. And right now it looks like they're building a city closer to the little house. So I wonder if the little house likes that. More roads were made, and then a countryside was divided into lots. More houses and bigger houses, apartment houses, tenement houses, schools, stores, garages spread over the land and crowded around that little house. No one wanted to live in her and take care of her anymore. She couldn't be sold for gold or silver. She just stayed and watched. Now it was not so quiet and peaceful at night. Now the lights of the city were bright and very close, and the streetlights shone all night. This must be living in the city, thought the little house. I didn't know whether she liked it or not. She missed the field of daisies and the apple trees dancing in the moonlight. Pretty soon, there were trolley cars going back and forth in front of the little house. They went back and forth all day and part of the night. Everyone seemed very busy, and everyone seemed to be in a hurry. Pretty soon, there was an elevated train going back and forth above the little house, and the air was filled with dust and smoke, and the noise was so loud that it shook the little house. Now she couldn't tell when spring came, or summer, or fall, or winter. It all seemed about the same. Pretty soon, there was a subway going back and forth underneath the little house. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it and hear it. People were moving faster and faster. No one noticed the little house anymore. They hurried by without a glance. Pretty soon, they tore down the apartment houses and the tenement houses around the little house, and they started digging big cellars, one on each side. A steam shovel dug down 3 stories on one side and 4 stories on the other. Pretty soon, they started building up. They built 25 stories on one side and 35 on the other. Now the little house only saw the sun at noon and didn't see the moon or the stars at night at all because the lights of the city were too bright. She didn't like living in the city. All night she used to dream of the country and the field of daisies and the apple trees and dancing in the moonlight. The little house was very sad and lonely. Her paint was cracked and dirty. Her windows were broken. Her shutters were hung crookedly. She looked very shabby, though she was just as good a house as ever underneath. Boys and girls, have you ever been to a big city like this that has like the trains? Have you ever been to Charlotte? Charlotte, we have a train system. It's called the light rail, and you can ride that all the way through town. Also, other big cities like New York City or Atlanta, they have big buildings just like that and lots of big transportation like this. So actually, it reminds me of when I visited those places, and even here in Charlotte, our little town of Concord doesn't have big buildings like that. It's very, very hometown or small feeling. But we do have some big cities and big buildings really close to us here in Concord. Then one fine morning in spring, along came the great-great-granddaughter of the man who built the little house. So well, she saw the shabby little house But she didn't hurry by. There was something about that little house that made her stop and look again. She said to her husband, "That little house looks like the little house my grandmother lived in when she was a little girl. Only that little house was way out in the country, on a hill covered with daisies and apple trees growing around." They found it was the very same house. So they went to the movers to see if the little house could be moved. The movers looked at the little house all over and said, "Sure, this house is as good as ever. She's built so well, we could move her anywhere." So they jacked up the little house, put her on wheels. Traffic was held up for hours as they slowly moved her out of the city. At first, the little house was frightened, but after she got used to it, she rather liked it. They rolled along a big road. They rolled along a little road until they were way out in the country. When the little house saw the green grass and heard the birds singing, she didn't feel sad anymore. They went along and along, but they couldn't seem to find just the right place. They tried the little house here. They tried her there. Finally, they saw a little hill in the middle of a field and apple trees growing around. "There," said the great-great-granddaughter. "That's just the place." "Yes, it is," said the little house to herself. A cellar was dug on top of the hill, and slowly they moved the house from the road to the hill. The windows and shutters were fixed, and once again they painted her the lovely shade of pink. As the little house settled down in her new foundation, she smiled happily. Once again, she could watch the sun and moon and stars. Once again, she could watch spring and summer and fall and winter come and go. Once again, she was lived in and taken care of. Never again would she be curious about the city. Never again would she live there. The stars twinkled above her. Then a new moon was coming up. It was spring, and all was quiet and peaceful in the country. Well, I hope you liked this story, The Little House. I really liked it. I think she's so happy now that she's back in the country. And I think that she probably loved being able to experience that city, but I'm glad the great-great-granddaughter found her place back in the country with the apple orchards and the singing birds and the daisies. I hope you liked the story, The Little House by Virginia Lee Burton.